The road to the old place was cracked like dry skin, stretching through fields that had long forgotten the sound of harvest. Wind whispered through broken fence posts and rusted wire, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something older, something forgotten. Most people avoided that road. Not because they were told to, but because it felt like a place where stories didn't end well. At the very end of it stood a building of stone and brick, worn down by time, with iron bars still clinging stubbornly to its narrow windows. The faded sign above its entrance read, Hamilton County Jail, established in 1912. It hadn't held prisoners in decades. Now it just held silence. On a cold afternoon, when the sky hung low and gray, an elderly couple stood facing that building. They didn't speak for a while. They simply looked at it, as if trying to understand what they had just done. The man stood tall despite the years pressing on his shoulders, his coat too thin for the chill. The woman leaned slightly into him, her hand wrapped around his arm like it had been for most of her life. At their feet sat two old suitcases, worn at the corners, holding everything they had left. They had paid $6 for the place. $6 for a jail no one wanted in a town that barely remembered it existed. People in the nearby county had laughed when they heard. Some shook their heads. Others muttered that age had finally caught up with them. A few said nothing at all, just watched quietly, the way people do when they think something strange is about to unfold. Because no one buys a place like that unless they're running from something or towards something no one else can see. The couple didn't explain themselves. They hadn't explained much in years. Their children had left long ago. At first it was for good reasons, jobs in bigger cities, better schools, a chance at something more than quiet roads and simple living. The couple had been proud then, standing on their porch, waving goodbye with smiles that hid the ache underneath. Letters came at first, then calls, then fewer calls, then silence that stretched longer than it should have. Time passed in a way that felt slow and fast all at once. Holidays came and went with empty chairs at the table. Birthdays were remembered quietly. The house they had built together began to feel too large, its walls holding more memories than voices. They never spoke badly about their children. Not once, but there was a weight in their silence that said more than words ever could. One day, without much discussion, they packed their things. They didn't take much, just what mattered. A few clothes, some photographs. A small wooden box filled with letters tied together with a fading ribbon. The rest they left behind. It was easier that way. No one knew where they were going until the news spread about the jail. The first time they stepped inside, the door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Dust hung thick in the air, catching what little light slipped through the barred windows. The floor creaked under their feet, and somewhere deep inside, a loose piece of metal clanged softly, as if the building itself was waking up. Cells lined the walls, their doors rusted but still strong. The iron bars were cold to the touch, stubborn reminders of a time when people were locked away and forgotten. The place smelled of age, of rain that had seeped through cracks, of stories that had never been told again. The woman tightened her grip on the man's arm. For a moment, it looked like she might turn back. Anyone else would have. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow breath and stepped further inside. "This will do," she said quietly. The man nodded, though his eyes wandered across the dark corners as if trying to measure the years hidden in those walls. He wasn't a man who spoke much, but when he did, his words carried weight. "It's strong," he replied. Still standing after all this time, that seemed to matter to both of them. Days turned into weeks, and the old jail began to change, though not in ways anyone expected. The couple worked slowly, carefully. They didn't rush. There was no one to impress, no deadline to meet. Every nail hammered, every board placed, every piece of rust cleared away was done with patience that only comes from a lifetime of building and rebuilding. They cleaned the floors first, sweeping away years of dust. Then they opened the windows, letting fresh air push out the stale silence. The cells, once meant to hold people in, became something else entirely. One was cleared out and filled with light. Another was softened with old blankets and a small wooden chair. Bit by bit, the place began to lose its cold edge. But still, people talked. A delivery driver passing through stopped one morning, watching from his truck as the couple worked near the entrance. He didn't get out, didn't say a word, but when he drove off, he carried the image with him. It spread from one town to the next, growing with each telling. "They're fixing it up," someone said. "For what?" another asked. No one had an answer. At night, the jail looked different. The darkness wrapped around it, making it seem even older than it was. But sometimes a small light could be seen through one of the windows. A soft glow, steady and warm. It didn't belong there, not in a place like that. And yet it stayed. The couple rarely left. When they did, it was only for supplies. They spoke little to others, but they were never unkind. There was something about them that made people curious, even if they couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way they carried themselves, or the quiet determination in their eyes, or maybe it was the simple fact that they had chosen that place. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fading gold, the woman stood just outside the jail, looking at the land around it. The weeds had begun to clear. The broken fence had been mended in places. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "You think they'll come?" she asked softly. The man stood beside her, his hands resting in his coat pockets. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the road disappeared into the distance. "I don't know," he finally said. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only honest one. They stood there together in silence, the wind brushing past them like an old memory. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, its voice echoing across the empty fields. Inside the jail, something had begun to take shape. Not just repairs or changes, but something deeper. Something that didn't quite fit with what the building had once been. The walls seemed less heavy. The air felt different, warmer, but no one outside had seen enough to understand. Not yet. As night settled in, the small light inside flickered to life again. It glowed brighter than before, spilling through the bars and into the darkness outside. If anyone had been passing by, they might have slowed down, maybe even stopped to look a little closer. Because for a moment, it didn't look like a jail at all. It looked like something else, something unexpected. And whatever the elderly couple was building behind those old iron bars, it was clear it wasn't just for themselves. But what it was and who it was truly meant for remained hidden in the quiet, waiting to be revealed. The light inside the old jail stayed on long after the sky turned black. It did not flicker like a weak bulb struggling to survive. It held steady, soft but certain, like someone had given it a purpose. From the outside, it still looked like a place people should avoid. But that light made it harder to look away. Inside, the woman moved slowly across the worn floor, carrying a folded piece of cloth in her hands. She paused near one of the old cells, now cleared and swept clean, and placed the cloth carefully on a narrow wooden frame. It was not much to look at yet, just a simple structure built from old boards they had found stacked behind the building. But she smoothed the fabric over it like it mattered. The man was near the entrance, working on the heavy door. He had taken it off its hinges 2 days earlier and spent hours scraping away rust. Now it leaned against the wall, cleaner than before, its metal surface catching the warm glow of the lamp. He tested the hinges again, tightening them with slow, steady movements. "Still strong?" he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She glanced at him but did not answer. Her attention returned to the small space she was shaping. There was a quiet focus in everything she did, as if she was building something she had imagined for a long time but never spoken about. They had not always been like this, so quiet, so careful with their words. There was a time when their home had been filled with noise, laughter that echoed through open windows, the sound of footsteps running across wooden floors, voices calling out from one room to another. Life had once moved quickly around them. Back then, the man worked long days with his hands. He fixed things, built things, carried the weight of the family without complaint. The woman kept everything together. She made sure the house felt like a place worth coming back to. There was always food on the table, always warmth in the rooms, always something waiting at the end of the day. Their children had grown up in that house, learned to walk on its floors, learned to speak within its walls. It had been enough then, more than enough. But years changed things in ways no one could stop. The first child to leave promised to return soon. Said it was only for a while, just until things settled. The second followed not long after, chasing a different dream but speaking the same words. The others left in their own time, each with reasons that sounded right when spoken out loud. The couple believed them. They wanted to believe them. At first, the distance did not feel so wide. Calls came in the evenings. News was shared. Small stories, simple updates. The woman would sit by the phone, her voice warm and steady, asking questions, listening closely. The man would nod along, adding a word here and there. Then the calls grew shorter. Then they came less often. The woman noticed it first, but said nothing. The man noticed it too, but he also stayed quiet. They did not want to turn it into something heavier than it already was. Days turned into weeks, then months. The house began to feel different. Not empty exactly, but quieter in a way that settled deep in the bones. They moved through their routines, holding on to what they had built together, but something had shifted. One winter, the snow came early and stayed longer than usual. The roads were hard to travel, and the town felt cut off from the rest of the world. It was during that winter that the woman started talking about leaving. Not in a loud way, not in a way that demanded attention. She simply mentioned it one evening while they sat near the window, watching the snowfall. "This place feels too big now," she said. The man did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the trees outside, their branches heavy with snow. He understood what she meant. He had felt it too. "We could go somewhere smaller," she added. He nodded slowly. Maybe that was how it began. They did not rush into it. Weeks passed before they spoke of it again, but once the idea took hold, it did not let go. The woman started sorting through old things. The man began repairing items they had not touched in years. It was not about getting rid of the past. It was about deciding what still mattered. The jail came into their lives almost by accident. A small notice in a local paper. A single line about an abandoned property up for sale. No pictures, no details. Just a location and a price that seemed too low to be real. $6. The man had read it twice, then folded the paper and set it aside. He did not mention it that day. But the next morning, he picked it up again. "Look at this," he said, handing it to her. She read it carefully, her eyes moving slowly across the words. She did not laugh. She did not question it. She simply looked at him. "Where is it?" she asked. That question was all it took. They drove out to see it a few days later. The road was rough, the path unclear in places. But when they reached the end, there it was. The old jail stood exactly as it does now. Quiet, weathered, forgotten. They walked around it first, taking in the details, the stone walls, the iron bars, the heavy door. It was not inviting, it did not try to be. But there was something about it. The woman was the first to step closer. She placed her hand on the cold stone, feeling its rough surface beneath her fingers. "It's still here," she said softly. The man understood what she meant. So many places had changed, been torn down, replaced, but this one had stayed. Not because anyone wanted it to, but because no one had bothered to remove it. They went inside together. The air was thick, the silence deep, but as they moved through the rooms, something shifted. Not in the building, but in them. The man saw the strength of the structure, the way it had held up against time. The woman saw the space, the possibility hidden beneath the dust and decay. They did not need to say much. By the time they left, the decision had already been made. Back in the present, the man finally reattached the door. It swung open and closed with a low, steady sound. Not smooth yet, but better than before. He stepped back, studying his work. "It will hold," he said. The woman walked over, her hands brushing lightly against the wood of the door. She nodded. "Good," she replied. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling through the dry grass. The sky was darker now, the stars beginning to appear one by one. They moved through the space together, checking what they had done, planning what would come next. The cells were no longer just cells. Each one had begun to take on a different purpose. One held a table and 2 chairs. Another had shelves made from old planks, holding jars and small items they had collected. In the far corner, the woman had started something she had not yet explained. It was a small area, cleared more carefully than the rest. The floor had been scrubbed until the wood showed through. A narrow bed frame stood against the wall, covered with a clean blanket. Beside it, a small table held a lamp, its light soft and steady. The man had noticed it, but had not asked about it. Not yet. Late that night, as they sat together near the entrance, the woman finally spoke. "It won't just be us," she said. The man turned his head slightly, his eyes searching her face. "What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands, then back up at the space around them. "This place," she continued, "it's not meant to stay empty." He listened quietly. "There are people," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "who don't have anywhere to go. People who get left behind." The words hung in the air between them. The man leaned back slightly, considering what she was saying. It was not a small idea. Not something that could be done without thought. "And you think this is the place for them?" he asked. She nodded. "I do." He looked around the old jail, seeing it in a different way now. Not just as a building they had bought, not just as a place to live, but as something that could become more. "It won't be easy," he said. "I know," she replied. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We'll make it work." Outside, the road remained empty. No cars passed, no footsteps approached. The world beyond the fields carried on, unaware of what was slowly taking shape inside those old walls. But somewhere far away, decisions were being made. Paths were shifting. Lives were moving in directions no one could predict. And before long, that quiet road would not stay empty forever. The first knock came on a morning wrapped in fog. It was so soft that the woman almost thought she had imagined it. She stood still near the table, her hand resting on the back of a chair, listening. The man looked up from where he was fixing a loose board along the wall. They both waited. The knock came again, a little firmer this time. The man walked toward the door, each step measured. He had grown used to the quiet around the place, and any sound that broke it felt larger than it should. When he opened the door, the cold air slipped inside, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and something else. Someone stood just beyond the entrance. It was a young figure, thin, with clothes that looked worn from travel. A small bag hung from one shoulder. The person did not speak right away, just looked past the man into the dim light of the old jail. "Are you the ones living here?" the visitor asked finally. The voice was steady, but there was a tired edge to it. The man hesitated, then nodded. "We are." The woman stepped closer, her eyes soft but careful. She had imagined this moment, but imagining and facing it were not the same. "What do you need?" she asked gently. The visitor shifted slightly, glancing back toward the road that stretched out behind them. "I heard about this place," came the reply. "Someone said you might be taking people in." The words settled heavily in the space between them. The man and the woman exchanged a quiet look. This was what they had talked about, what they had started building toward. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way they had not fully prepared for. "You can come in," the woman said after a moment. The visitor stepped inside slowly, eyes moving across the room, taking in the changes that had been made. The old cells, the small beds, the warmth that had replaced some of the cold edges. It was not much, but it was something. The man closed the door behind them, the sound of it echoing softly through the building. "Sit," he said, pointing to one of the chairs. The visitor nodded and lowered themselves into it, the bag slipping from their shoulder to the floor. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, just heavy with things not yet said. "What's your name?" the woman asked. The visitor hesitated, then gave it quietly. The man listened, committing it to memory. Names mattered, even in a place like this. "You've come a long way," he said. The visitor gave a small nod. "Far enough." The woman moved toward the small stove they had set up near the wall. She poured some water into a pot and set it to heat. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. "You can stay for a while," she said. "We don't have much, but we'll share what we can." The visitor looked up, something in their expression shifting. Not quite relief, not quite trust. Something in between. "Thank you," they said. Outside, the fog began to lift slowly, revealing the road again, but it did not stay empty for long. Word had started to spread. By midday, a truck rolled up the cracked path and stopped a short distance from the jail. Two men stepped out, both wearing heavy boots and jackets marked with the name of the county. They looked around with the kind of interest that did not come from curiosity alone. The man inside the jail noticed them through the window. His posture changed slightly, his shoulders tightening. "We've got company," he said quietly. The woman followed his gaze, her expression calm but alert. "Let them come," she replied. The men approached the building with steady steps. One of them knocked, louder than before, not waiting long before pushing the door open slightly. "Anyone here?" he called out. The man stepped forward to meet them. "We are." The two visitors entered, their eyes scanning the space. They took in the beds, the cleaned floors, the signs of life that had replaced the decay. "This property belongs to the county," one of them said. "We heard it was sold, but we wanted to confirm what's going on here." The man nodded slowly. "We bought it, $6. Properly signed." The other man frowned slightly. "That may be, but this place wasn't meant to be lived in." "It's not zoned for it." The woman stepped forward, her voice steady. "It was meant to be used. And it's been empty for years." "That doesn't change the rules," the first man replied. The visitor who had arrived earlier sat quietly, watching the exchange. Their hands rested on their knees, but there was a tension in their posture. "We're not causing trouble," the man said. "We're just trying to make use of what's been left behind." The two county men exchanged a glance. "You're taking people in?" one of them said. "We've heard that already." The woman did not deny it. "We are. That could become a problem," came the response. A long silence followed. "What kind of problem?" the man asked. The answer did not come right away. Instead, the two visitors looked around again, as if weighing what they saw against something else. "Safety," one of them finally said. "Responsibility. You can't just open a place like this without oversight." The woman held her ground. "And what happens to the people who have nowhere else to go?" The question lingered. Neither man answered directly. "We'll have to report this," one of them said after a moment. "There may be inspections. You might be asked to stop." The words landed hard, even if they were spoken calmly. The man nodded once. "We understand." The visitors left as quietly as they had come, their truck disappearing back down the road. Inside, the air felt different now. The visitor in the chair shifted slightly. "They're going to shut this down, aren't they?" The woman looked at them, her expression thoughtful. "Not if we can help it." The man leaned against the wall, his mind turning over the situation. He had expected challenges, but this came sooner than he thought. "We'll need to be careful," he said. "Do things right?" The woman nodded, but there was something else in her eyes. A quiet determination that had been there from the start. "We didn't come this far to stop now," she said. Days passed and more people began to arrive. Not many at first, one at a time. Each with their own story, their own reason for finding that road. Some stayed quiet. Others spoke in pieces, sharing what they felt safe to share. The old jail slowly filled with voices again. Soft conversations, careful laughter. The sound of movement that had not been there in years. But with each new arrival, the tension grew. The man worked longer hours, reinforcing the structure, making sure everything was as safe as he could make it. The woman moved between the rooms, checking on people, offering what comfort she could. The visitor who had come first stayed close, helping where possible. There was a sense of belonging beginning to take root, even if it was fragile. Outside, the road saw more activity. Cars slowed as they passed. Some stopped at a distance, watching. Not everyone approved. Not everyone understood. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a small group gathered near the edge of the property. They did not approach the building, but they did not leave either. Their voices carried faintly on the wind. Inside, the man noticed them. "They're watching," he said quietly. The woman joined him at the window. "Let them," she replied. But her hands tightened slightly at her sides. Later that night, as the light inside the jail glowed once more, a sound echoed from outside. Not a knock this time, something heavier, something deliberate. The people inside grew still. The man moved toward the door again, slower this time. When he opened it, the night air rushed in, colder than before. The group that had been watching now stood closer, their faces clearer in the dim light. One of them stepped forward. "You need to stop this," the person said. The words were not shouted, but they carried weight. The man stood firm. "We're not harming anyone." "That's not the point," came the reply. "This place was left behind for a reason." The woman stepped beside him. "Or maybe it was left behind so someone could use it again." The group shifted, uncertain. "You're bringing people here," another voice said. "Strangers. No one knows who they are." The visitor inside the jail moved closer, listening. "They're people," the woman said simply. The tension thickened. "This won't end well," the first voice warned. The man did not step back. "We'll take that risk." The group lingered for a moment longer, then slowly began to retreat. But their presence left something behind. A feeling that the road ahead would not be as quiet as it once was. Inside, the door closed again, the light continued to burn. And the old jail, once forgotten, now stood at the center of something that was only beginning to unfold. The night after the warning did not pass easily. The wind stayed restless, moving through the broken edges of the land like it carried a message no one wanted to hear. Inside the old jail, no one slept deeply. Even those who had grown used to hard nights found themselves waking at the smallest sound. The place that had begun to feel like shelter now felt watched. The man stayed awake longer than the others. He sat near the entrance, a lantern beside him, his hands resting on his knees. Every so often he looked toward the door as if expecting it to open without a knock. He had seen enough in his life to know when something was building. And something was. The woman moved quietly through the rooms, checking on each person. Some slept with their backs against the walls. Some curled under thin blankets. One of the newer arrivals whispered in their sleep, the words unclear but filled with unease. She paused beside them, placing a hand gently on their shoulder until the whispering stopped. When she returned to the entrance, the man looked up. "They're afraid," she said softly. He nodded. "So are we." She did not deny it. Fear had settled into the space, but it had not pushed them out. Not yet. Morning came slowly, with a pale light that did little to warm the ground. The fog returned, thicker than before, wrapping around the building and the road like a barrier. It made everything feel smaller, closer, like the outside world had pulled back for a moment, but it did not last. By midday, the sound of engines broke through the quiet again. Not one vehicle this time, but several. The man stepped outside before they even reached the building. The woman followed, wiping her hands on the edge of her sweater. 3 trucks came to a stop near the edge of the property. Doors opened, more people stepped out than before. Some wore the same county jackets. Others looked like locals from nearby areas. A few carried clipboards, one carried a camera. The group did not rush forward, but their presence filled the space in a way that made it clear they had come with purpose. The man stood his ground as they approached. "We told you we'd be back," one of the county men said. "I remember," the man replied. The woman stayed close beside him, her eyes moving across the group, reading the faces, searching for something she could not quite name. "We've received complaints," another voice said, "about safety, about the number of people staying here, about the condition of the building." The man glanced back at the jail, then returned his gaze forward. "We've been fixing it, making it safe. That's not for you to decide alone," came the answer. A clipboard was lifted, pages flipped. Words were spoken in a tone that felt official, distant, as if the place behind them was just another problem to solve on paper. Inside the jail, the people had gathered near the windows. They stayed quiet, watching. The first visitor, the one who had arrived on that foggy morning, stood near the door, close enough to hear every word. "They're going to make you close it," someone whispered. The visitor did not respond. Their eyes stayed fixed on the figures outside. "We need to inspect the property," one of the officials said. "Every part of it." The man hesitated for a brief moment, then stepped aside. "You can look." The group moved in, spreading out through the building. Their boots echoed against the floor louder than anything that had come before. They looked at the beds, the repaired walls, the small spaces that had been created with care. Some of them said nothing. Others made notes. One of them shook their heads slightly, though it was hard to tell what they were thinking. The woman followed at a distance, watching as they moved through the rooms she had shaped. Every blanket, every small detail felt exposed now, like something private had been placed under a bright light. "Who's responsible for all this?" one of them asked. "We are," the man answered. "That's not enough," came the reply. "There are rules for places like this." The tension tightened with every step they took. In one of the far cells, the official with the camera paused. They lifted it, capturing the narrow bed, the lamp, the careful arrangement of what little had been gathered there. "This used to be a holding cell," they said. "It still holds people," the woman replied quietly. "Just in a different way." The person lowered the camera, their expression unreadable. Outside, more vehicles began to slow along the road. Word had spread faster than expected. A few people stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold. Some spoke in low voices. Others simply observed, waiting to see what would happen next. The man could feel it shifting. What had started as quiet work had become something visible, something that could not be ignored anymore. When the inspection ended, the group gathered near the entrance again. The air felt heavier than before. "There are too many concerns," one of the officials said. "Structural issues, safety risks, no proper approvals. You can't continue like this." The words came steady, practiced, but they carried a final weight that settled into the ground. The woman stepped forward. "Where are they supposed to go?" No one answered immediately. "That's not our responsibility," another voice said after a moment. The people inside the jail grew still. The visitor near the door tightened their grip on the strap of their bag. "It became ours the moment they walked in," the woman said. The man glanced at her, then back at the group. "We're not asking for anything," he added. "Just time." The officials exchanged looks. Some seemed unsure, others remained firm. "You've already taken too much of it," one replied. A paper was handed over. The man took it, his fingers steady even as he read the words. A notice, instructions, a timeline that felt too short for what they had built. The woman watched his face, searching for a reaction. He did not show much, but she could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "They're serious," he said quietly. Before they could say more, a voice came from behind them. "We can't leave." It was the first visitor. They had stepped forward, their voice clear enough to carry across the space. All eyes turned. "We don't have anywhere else," they continued. "None of us do." A murmur moved through the people inside. Some nodded. Others looked down, but the truth of it hung in the air. One of the officials sighed, rubbing their forehead. "This isn't how things work." "Maybe that's the problem," the visitor replied. The moment stretched, filled with something raw and unspoken. Outside, the small crowd had grown. A few more cars had stopped. People stood along the road, watching not just with curiosity now, but with interest. Some recognized faces inside. Some whispered names. The tension had reached a point where it could not be ignored anymore. The man folded the paper slowly. "We hear you," he said. "But we're not turning anyone out today." "That's not your choice," came the firm response. The woman stepped closer to him, her shoulder brushing his. "It is for now." The wind picked up again, stronger than before, moving through the open space and rattling the loose edges of the fence. It carried voices, movement, the sense that something was about to break. For a moment no one moved. Then one of the officials stepped back, signaling to the others. "We'll return," they said. "And next time, this won't be a discussion." They turned and walked away, the rest of the group following. The truck started, engines rumbling as they pulled back onto the road, but they did not leave the scene empty. The people who had gathered stayed. Some stepped closer now, their hesitation fading. One of them, an older figure with a weathered face, approached the couple slowly. "You really taking people in?" they asked. The man nodded. The person looked past them, into the jail, at the faces inside. Something in their expression softened. "There are more," they said quietly. "In worse shape." The woman felt her breath catch slightly. The visitor beside her spoke again, softer this time. "They'll come." The man looked at the road, at the growing number of figures, at the place they had turned into something more than it was meant to be. The notice in his hand felt heavier with each passing second. "We don't have enough," he said under his breath. The woman heard him. She looked at the space around them, at the people already inside, at the ones beginning to step forward from the road. "No," she said. "But we have something." The light inside the jail flickered slightly as the wind pushed against the walls. It did not go out. As more footsteps approached, as more voices filled the air, it became clear that whatever happened next would change everything. And standing there between the road and the doorway, the couple realized that the hardest part had only just begun. The road did not empty that day. Instead, it filled in a quiet, steady way that no one could have planned. People stood in small groups, some unsure, some curious, some carrying the same tired look as the ones already inside the old jail. The couple remained at the entrance, not turning anyone away, but not rushing forward either. They knew this moment needed care. The man looked at the notice again, then folded it carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. It still mattered, but something else mattered more now. He stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was calm, but strong enough to carry. "We don't have much," he said, "but if you come in, you help. Everyone does what they can." There was no grand promise in his words. No false comfort, just a simple truth. One by one, people began to step closer. The woman moved among them, greeting each person with a quiet nod or a gentle word. She did not ask too many questions. She had learned that people would speak when they were ready. For now, it was enough to make space. Inside, the old jail shifted again. What had started as a place of careful repair now became something alive. The rooms filled, not with noise, but with presence. People found corners, shared blankets, moved things to make room for others. The first visitor took it upon themselves to guide the newcomers, showing them where to sit, where to place their things. The man worked without stopping. He adjusted boards, secured loose hinges, and cleared more space. Others joined him. Some had skills, some just had willing hands. It did not matter. What mattered was that no one stood idle. Outside, the small crowd that had gathered earlier began to change too. A few people who had only come to watch now stepped forward with quiet offers. One brought a bundle of old blankets from the back of a truck. Another returned with a box of canned food. Someone else arrived with tools. The woman noticed it first. "They're helping," she said softly. The man followed her gaze. "Some of them are," he replied. Not everyone agreed with what was happening. There were still those who stood at a distance, arms crossed, shaking their heads, but even they did not leave right away. They watched, as if waiting to see if this strange effort would fall apart on its own. It did not. By evening, the jail looked different again. Not cleaner, not bigger, but fuller in a way that felt steady. The light inside burned brighter, not because the lamp had changed, but because there were more hands to tend it. The first visitor sat near the entrance, speaking quietly with another newcomer. Their voice had lost some of its earlier edge. There was still weariness there, but also something new. A sense of belonging that had not been there before. "You came first," the newcomer said. The visitor shook their heads slightly. "No, they did." They glanced toward the couple, who were working side by side near the far wall. "They just opened the door," they added. As night settled in, the wind calmed. The sky cleared, revealing stars that had been hidden for days. The road outside grew quieter, but not empty. A few vehicles remained parked nearby. A few figures stayed close, not quite inside, but no longer distant either. Inside, the woman moved from person to person, checking on them, offering small reassurances. She stopped near the narrow bed in the far cell, the one she had prepared so carefully. For a moment she stood there, her hand resting on the edge of the frame. The man joined her. "You made this before anyone came," he said. She nodded. "I thought someone might need it," she replied. He looked at her, understanding settling slowly. "You knew?" he said. She gave a small smile. "I hoped." They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had done pressing in, but not in a way that felt heavy. More like something that had found its place. The next morning brought a different kind of sound. Not engines this time, but footsteps. The officials had returned, just as they said they would. But the scene they found was not the one they had left. The old jail was no longer quiet and uncertain. It was active. People moved in and out, carrying water, stacking supplies, repairing what they could. The building still showed its age, but it no longer felt abandoned. The man stepped forward to meet them again, the woman at his side. "We're still here," one of the officials said, though it sounded more like a statement than a warning this time. The man nodded. "So are we?" They looked past him, taking in the changes, the added support beams, the cleared pathways, the number of people working together. "You didn't leave," another said. "No," the woman replied. "We didn't." There was a pause, longer than before. "You've made it harder now," one of them admitted quietly. The man tilted his head slightly. "Harder to close?" The official did not answer directly. "We'll need to review this again," they said instead. "Things have changed." The woman met their gaze. "Yes, they have." This time, when the officials walked through the building, their steps were slower. Their eyes took in more than just the structure. They saw the people, the way they moved, the way they spoke to each other, the way they worked together without being told. They saw something that did not fit neatly into their rules. When they gathered again near the entrance, the tone had shifted. "This still isn't approved," one of them said. "But it's also not what we expected." The man waited. "We can't promise anything," the official continued. "But we'll talk to the county. There may be a way to work something out." It was not a yes, but it was not a no. The woman felt a quiet relief settle in her chest. Not because the problem was solved, but because it had changed shape. "Thank you," she said simply. The officials left again, but this time the air they left behind felt different. Days turned into weeks. The road that had once been avoided became known. Not in a loud way, not with signs or announcements, but through quiet word of mouth. People spoke of the old jail in low voices, sharing what they had seen. Some came to stay, others came to help. A few came just to see if it was real. Each day brought its own challenges. There were not always enough supplies. Repairs took time. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, times when the weight of it all felt too much. But each time someone stepped forward. The man found himself working alongside people he had never known before, teaching them what he could, learning from them in return. The woman built connections in ways she had not expected, listening to stories, offering comfort, creating a sense of home in a place that had never known it. The first visitor stayed, becoming a steady presence near the entrance. They greeted newcomers now, just as they had once been greeted. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the ground for the first time in days, a car pulled up that neither the man nor the woman recognized. It stopped at the edge of the property, and for a moment no one got out. Then the door opened. Two figures stepped out slowly, looking toward the jail with a kind of hesitation that felt familiar. The woman noticed them first. Something in the way they stood, the way they looked at the building, made her pause. The man followed her gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the figures began to walk forward. The distance between them closed slowly, each step carrying something unspoken. When they reached the entrance, they stopped. "We heard about this place," one of them said. The voice was careful, uncertain. The woman looked at them, really looked this time. There were years in those faces. Years of distance, of choices made in time past. The man stood beside her, his expression steady. "You found it," he said. The figures nodded. "We didn't know if we should come," the other admitted. The woman took a small step forward. "You're here now," she said. There was no anger in her voice. No blame, just a quiet acceptance that felt stronger than anything else. The space between them held 1,000 things that could have been said, but none of them came first. Instead, the woman reached out her hand. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, one of the figures stepped forward and took it. The man let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Around them, the life inside the old jail continued. People moved, worked, spoke, laughed in small ways. The place that had once been a symbol of being locked away had become something else entirely, a place where people came back. A place where they stayed. A place built not from walls, but from the simple choice to open a door and not close it again. And as the light inside the jail glowed against the coming evening, it was clear that what had started with $6 and a quiet hope had become something far greater than anyone could have expected. Thanks for watching this story. Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Tell me in the comments what you felt about this story and what kind of stories you want to see next. See you in the next story.